Welcome back to our study in 1 Peter. I'm Phil Robertson, joined by Mark Lloyd Sr. And Mark, great to see you.
It's good to be here. It's always good for us to be together to film this class. I just enjoy it very much.
Well, and if you enjoy today just even half as much as probably you enjoyed Saturday, you're going to be in a good mood, aren't you?
You know, defeat and yet being happy about how we played. What can I say? I thought it was a good weekend.
Well, he's sporting the colors, folks. He went to the game and enjoyed the game, and boy, it was a good day for the Gators. And if we could segue off that into today, there is sometimes victory that comes through suffering. And that's exactly what Peter is speaking to Christians about as we get to 1 Peter chapter 4. Now, before I start reading, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 11 here in a moment, so if you have the Heavenly Library with you, we would invite you to open up the book of 1 Peter. But before we start reading from the text, I think it's important for us to remember this letter was written to Christians who were suffering, and if they weren't suffering a lot at the moment, it was coming. And that's why Peter's sharing this message. And it would be suffering because of their faith.
Yes.
And part of that is just hard for us to fathom. Now, we all have probably endured some means of challenge with respect to our faith. Maybe somebody mocks our faith, or we're too conservative, or too whatever may come to mind. But this was literally physical persecution because of faith.
I think that we ought to keep in mind that he is telling these brethren here very soon that some of them may suffer even till death. And I think that's his inference here in these first couple of verses. We don't suffer anywhere near that today, and yet we can become very indignant. And that's what I think we got to really see what Peter's saying here to these brethren, that yes, you may even suffer up till death, but you may lose family, you may lose your job, you may lose a number of things, but you're to keep your faith. And how much should that translate to us today? And the small things that we may suffer in. It's just, we've got to have good attitudes.
Well, and it's even more powerful by what he doesn't say in the letter. He doesn't say start a campaign to change the government.
No.
Let's start picketing, let's start protesting, and really just go to town on all the injustice in the world. Although they're there, and that probably wouldn't be wrong, Peter says, don't change others. You just make sure you change, and you're modeling Christ in your life.
It's almost as if he's saying, whatever happens to you, smile.
Yeah.
and remain humble with a good attitude, especially towards your brethren. And so we're going to see that in this passage as well. So it's quite an admonition to us, not anywhere close to what they were having to feel and suffer. And Peter's saying, hang in there.
Well, and it's relevant. It's relevant in the sense that we should learn from Peter and try to learn from our brethren who are receiving these words. Okay, let's get into it. We're in 1 Peter chapter 4, and I'll read verses 1 through 11. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same form of debauchery, and they malign you, but they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is why the gospel was preached even to those who were dead, that though judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. And as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks, as one who speaks the oracles of God. Whoever serves, as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. All right, let's just begin with that opening line. You ready? Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking. Is that a challenge, or is that just theology?
No, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
That is a challenge. Christ suffered in the flesh, but his suffering ended up in death. Mm-hmm. And so I truly believe, as the translators say here, if you look over in your
the footnotes,
mm-hmm. suffered death. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what he's saying here, and he's then saying to us, to them, because he who has suffered in the flesh, i.e. that then would be us or the brethren, has ceased from sin. Well, if this was a continual suffering and you didn't die, the first time we suffer doesn't mean that we're not going to sin again.
Yeah.
So I think we have to take what's being said here and just what happened to Jesus. He suffered in the flesh and died. Well, some of you may suffer in the flesh and die. And the emphasis there is, hey guys, then you have ceased sinning.
Yeah.
Think of what's going to happen. He's going to talk about judgment here. But if you have done what you're supposed to be doing, that ceasing sin means you are with God.
Yeah.
And what a wonderful thought.
Yeah, I've been just thinking a lot about that from the standpoint of our good friend and brother D. Bowman, who passed away a week or so ago, and I just couldn't help but think what all he's not having to do now.
No,
and that's a great list.
Yes.
When you start
yes.
looking at all the things you don't have to do.
No,
and certainly at the top of that list, you don't have to deal with sin anymore.
You don't have to deal with sin anymore. It can happen. We're protecting ourselves. We're trying to protect ourselves. But if you live the life that God wants you to live, if you're living in the light, as we read over in 1 John, and doing the best that you can do, and if you die, guess what? You don't have to face that anymore. You are in a better place.
But if you're here still in the flesh, as he says,
that's where we go in verse 2.
If you are still here in the flesh,
yes.
Don't live like the world lives. And so now he gives us the contrast. Now, and here's what's to me is so powerful about this. The contrast between the person of the world in the flesh and the child of God who's living by the Spirit of God. It is the person in the flesh who's living contrary to God's will who's causing all the turmoil for the person in the flesh.
Yes.
And Peter puts his attention not so much on this list as he does on the child of God and says, don't act like that.
No, don't act like that. Don't be like that. Don't fall back into that. That's what he's going to be saying here in a minute. You have two choices: following after the lust of men or following after the will of God. That's our only two choices. When people think that, well, I'll get as close to lust as I can, and if you don't call it lust, maybe I'm okay.
Yeah. It's okay to look but not touch. I'll just get
that's
there.
Not what the Lord's saying. There's two things that we can be doing: the will of God or the lust of men. Why would I want to get as close to the lust of men that I could and still be okay? You don't want to be anywhere close to that. You want to be over here knowing what the will of God is and doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so arm yourself.
That's what the whole...
This is,
yes.
You get ready for battle, but your battle is different. Your battle is not, I'm here to change the whole world and its outlooks and its worldliness. That's just the way worldly people are, but I can change me.
And if you don't understand what I'm saying here, I'm going to list it for you here in just these next couple of verses. I'm going to tell you what the Gentiles were doing, and I'm going to tell you what you used to be doing.
All right, if you're at home, if you have one of the study guides, I'm going to go through the list here for you of some of these sins that you would simply refer to as the way of the flesh. So, and again, if you need a study guide, let us know. we can certainly send one to you. But as good stewards of the grace of God, we need to recognize we don't want to get near this.
No.
We don't want to get near this list. The way of the flesh is wretched. So let's go through the list here just real quickly. I see 6 things here that Paul's throwing. This is certainly not an all-encompassing list.
No.
But boy, it's a powerful list that when you look at it, the world hasn't changed much in the past 2,000 years.
This just reminds me of Gainesville.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately. Lasciviousness. How would you define that?
Well, and here it's called sensuality.
Well,
That's just a movement. It's actions that create images in your mind. It's just doing illicit things as far as potential sexuality is concerned.
Right. And here's what's interesting. You probably have heard this, being a pastor, an elder. You know the Bible didn't explicitly say, no, you can't do this, or no, you can't dress this way, or no, you can't go here. Well, I would say, yeah, it kind of did.
Yes.
If you ever define the word lasciviousness or sensuality, it's a very broad term.
It covers a lot of potential sinning.
Yeah. One commentator put it like this: it is a form of, it's lewdness in any form, in any shape, of any kind.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So lasciviousness.
Nice broad definition.
Somewhere you can get it
That's
all.
right. That's right.
Lust.
Well, you got lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life.
Pride of life.
I mean, you've got all of those lusts. It covers a gambit of sins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what your eyes see, what your mind's thinking, what you want to be doing, the pride of life. That's considered in all of these lusts here.
Yeah, craving for what is forbidden.
Yes.
That's what you're doing. You're craving. And what's interesting is that's even one of the original 10 Commandments. You know, don't covet what is somebody else's. Drunkenness.
I think that's self-explanatory. That's one of those things that you could say, you can't get around that one.
Yeah.
Excess. We understand.
An overflow.
That's an
excess
of alcohol that causes you to not function as you should.
This is not exactly the idea of a little bit of wine for the stomach's sake,
no.
as Paul will instruct Timothy. This is excess of wine. Reveling. What does your Bible say? Carousals. And so some translations may even use the word, the idea of orgies involved here. Carousal.
Yeah.
One neat way I heard it described was this: it's being with the crowd at the wrong place at the wrong time and being with the wrong crowd.
Yeah,
is really what it is. It's, when you're in an environment, this isn't a good place to be.
Exactly.
This isn't a good place to be.
Same way with the next one.
Or banqueting or drinking party.
Yeah.
I mean, just the idea, drinking party.
That's
I mean,
right.
A light bulb should go off. Can we be honest on that one?
Well, and I've talked on drugs before and alcohol, and I've talked about at length. Drunkenness is that's self-defining. That's excess. Well, carousals in the Greek basically is being with a group of people that are half drunk. Is it okay to be half drunk? Yeah. Well, here he's defining it as, yes, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Well, then drinking parties, interestingly enough, has no content of alcohol in it as far as how much that you may have drunk. So when you have brethren say, well, I could go to that party, and all I didn't drink, but everybody else there was drinking. I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about going to the excesses of what the Gentiles do. It's being, again, at the wrong place at the wrong time. You do not need to be there. That's an influence thing. That's everything else. And you can call it what it is. Alcohol is there. You're not worried about the content or how much. It's just going on.
Well, and it may not necessarily be a drinking party, although that's the word here. It's just a place where there's no acknowledgement, no respect, and no form of godliness is going to be there.
And my whole point is, if I am at these places doing these things, supposedly with an okay frame of mind, The next day, you go talk to the people about Christ and see what they're going to say.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. You were with me last night doing these things, and now you want to come to me and talk to me about Christ?
All right, well, let me play devil's advocate with you and have a little fun with you here. With Jesus hung out with the tax collectors and the sinners. Now, what are you going to do with that? And he went to the feast at their house.
Every time that he did that, what happened?
He preached.
Yes. So there's my answer. That's very simple. Every time they listed that, he was with the tax gatherers. He was with the sinners. And you point out to me, every time that he did that, he was preaching. So I'm going to say to you, if you're going to do that,
If that's your argument?
If that's your argument, I want to hear what you preached.
Tell me your sermon.
Yeah,
your sermon
tell
was.
me what your sermon was.
Well, and it is kind of interesting too. Yes, our Lord had great compassion and spent a lot of time with the tax collectors and sinners, and that's a powerful example for all of us. But really, in almost every case and instance that you see that, he's the attraction,
yes,
not their will or what's going on there. When he's at Matthew, the tax collector's house, Matthew's invited everybody to meet Jesus. When he's at Simon the Pharisee's house and the woman comes in and starts bathing his feet with her tears, he's there in a teaching role. You see that over and over
I will
again.
also say this. Everybody in with Jesus knew Jesus and knew the kind of individual he was.
Right.
They all knew it. And so for him to be there, that probably was an anomaly. That's why they're bringing it out. So if you can convince me that when you go to these parties, everybody there knows who you are and what you stand for and the kind of person you are and you're teaching, then you come to me and we'll talk about it.
And you'll never find Jesus at one of these parties that you have here listed in this.
Yes.
This is not one of these situations.
No.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. And then the last one, I've got lawless idolatry mentioned here in the study guide, and it's just the idea to have image worshiping.
Yeah. But all of these are general enough.
You've elevated something above the Lord.
Cover a multitude.
It's pretty broad, isn't it? Here's a big blanket over all of it. Where's it
All over all
yeah.
of it. Yes.
Yeah. And really, if we get back now to the point where we started, people that do that, they're going to have to give an account toward God.
That's what we're going to read. Yes, that's what we're going to read.
They're going to be judged for that. But you're a child of God. You're different. And so even in your suffering, you're different. And this is the idea of victorious suffering, or it's suffering with a mind focused on the will of God. And if you look at verse 6, this is why the gospel was preached even to those that were dead, that though they were judged in the flesh the way people are, that they might live in the spirit the way God does.
Yes. I mean, the gospel is preached for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Those people who hear the gospel are going to be judged by the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And these blasphemers that we have up here are reviling you because you're not living the way they are. Verse 5 says, well, they're going to face the Lord at some time. They're going to have to give an account. Well, in verse 6, the gospel was preached to them just as it's been preached to you.
Mm-hmm.
You, those who may have died in the faith, you're still going to be judged by what you did in the flesh. That's how we're going to be judged.
Sure.
It's what we've done on earth. Well, they're going to be judged in such a way that they're not going to be happy. You're going to be judged in such a way, what? That you may live in the Spirit according to the will of God. You have a great place in the future with God if you live and do not do these things in excess that like the Gentiles do. I mean, this should be a passage that is so self-assuring to us that we're living the life that we need to be living.
You're different. You're living according not to the will of the Gentiles, but the
Yes.
will of God. You're different. And so let's get to the end of all things.
Yes.
What a neat way to wrap this up here. Peter says, at the end of all things, here's who you are to be. Self-controlled. You're to be sober-minded, which is, to me, a kind of a play on all this alcohol talk here.
Yes.
And you're doing this for the sake of your prayers. Now we're getting back to prayers again.
Yes. He's already got the husbands with the wives.
Husbands, no, let those prayers be
He's not
hindered.
going to listen to you.
Yeah.
And here he is again. I mean, you're living a life that your prayers can be answered.
Yeah.
And so, for the purpose of prayer, we're in sound judgment and sober spirit.
All right, so I've got 4 things here that I have in my wrap-up, and I'll let you add to this list or add to it. So there's 4 things here that come really in the concept of arming yourself, and being of the same way of thinking as the Lord. Number 1, be self-controlled. Control your passions. Control your lust. Be self-controlled. Look for the Lord to help you be self-controlled. Number 2, be loving. Keep on loving one another. All right? And this kind of love covers a multitude of sins. It's a forgiving love. Passion love. We can talk about that in a moment. The third thing, be hospitable. And don't just be hospitable. Do it how?
Without murmuring.
Don't complain
Don't
about
complain about it.
Oh, so Mark's coming over?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy. Yay. Yay. All right. Oh, I've got to take care of him again. Oh, my. And then number 4, be a good steward. Be self-controlled. Be loving. Be hospitable. Be a good steward. Thoughts?
The good stewards, there is so many things to talk about here. The idea of hospitality, some people are better at it than others. But he's saying, if you have the opportunity, take care of one another. That's what hospitality is all about. And in fact, you guys are going to be in such a situation that you're probably going to be doing a whole bunch of hospitality because people are going to be losing houses, people are going to be losing jobs. And so
bring them in.
We need to be hospitable. But this idea of each one has received a special gift, use it. I probably think that in New Testament times this may have been a gift of the Holy Spirit. In New Testament times, some had tongues, some had prophecy, some had knowledge. Each of those were going to be beneficial to everyone. However, I also think, like in Romans, I think
Romans 12.
Romans 12, there were natural gifts there too. Talent, serving, wealth, these kind of things. And use them as well. And so, certainly today we don't have the spiritual gifts, but we have those natural gifts. I think everybody in the congregation has particular gifts that God has given them. He's saying to them, use them. Use them. And so he goes over here, if you're talking, if you're teaching, what? You teach the oracles of God. If you're over here serving, what are you doing? You're serving as God has supplied you. And you're giving God the glory. So we need to be doing those things today, helping one another with the gifts that we have.
And ultimately what we're doing is we're glorifying God with our lives.
Exactly.
And this idea that we have to do these grandiose things that everybody in the world knows about, no. Sometimes, I'll put it like this. You know, one of the best things that you can do for your local congregation, and I think I can speak for Mark and Bruce here, you know one of the best things you can do? Be a loving parent, be a loving spouse, be a servant of the Lord. That's the best thing you can do for this church.
Exactly. Be what he was talking about here. Be the kind of people in the world that the world sees that you're different.
Yeah.
That's preaching. That's preaching. That is serving others, and then you're serving this congregation.
Be self-controlled, be loving, be hospitable, be a good steward of grace. And I think it's also important to recognize anything that we have, any talent, any possession, it's by the grace of God.
Exactly.
Use it.
And let's be the people who are willing to use our talents. Don't hide it.
Yeah, don't hide it under a bushel. No. Don't let Satan...
No, let's use it, because we have such talented people, at least in this congregation, and I know a lot of congregations have a great deal of talent. But just speaking of our own congregation, we have the Lord has blessed us so greatly here. And it's always so good to see people using their talents.
Right. So, arm yourself. Arm yourself. This is victorious suffering, and have the same thinking. This is the end of all things. be thinking like the Lord does and live your life that way. Anything else you want to add?
Well, this end of all things is very interesting.
Yeah.
To them, some of them, it was
the end of all things.
Yeah. And so, Peter's also saying, as Paul did in any number of occasions, the end is at hand. John says it. The end. James says it. The end is at hand. These apostles are trying to prepare people that we don't know when the Lord's coming, so we need to be behaving like it's the end is at hand. Now, I will say in this particular case, to those that Peter may have been writing to, Jerusalem's destruction is about to be upon them.
If you're looking at that time frame, it's coming up.
It's coming up. So even to the Jews in this group, their end was really coming very soon. So in any number of ways, we need to be prepared for the end.
And maybe thinking of it with this kind of a timeline in mind, suffering is temporary.
Yes.
Struggling with the flesh is temporary. Dealing with the world is temporary. But heaven is forever.
We want to live in the Spirit according to the will of God.
Great line. I think that's a good place to end it. Anything else you want to add?
That's my best.
All right. Well, brethren, we commend these words from Peter to you. Continue to arm yourselves in the flesh, and let's just be who and what we need to be in a world that definitely needs to see the difference. And may the Lord, as well as the world, see the difference in us. God bless you.
Good night, brethren. In His time.
There we go. 4 minutes.